What's up everyone, it's a Knife Side here, and today I'm going to be doing my full review on the Spyderco SpydieChef. And I haven't posted in a couple weeks to YouTube, but I have been carrying this a lot. Probably got about a month of use on it, so I feel like I've carried it, used it, sharpened it enough to be able to do my full review on it. But let's get into this. So for the anatomy of this, the claim to fame, I would say, of this knife is that it is rust proof. It's got an LC200 blade, full titanium handles. It's got phosphor bronze washers with a, there is really no like steel insert on the detent ball, and it's a ceramic detent ball. And I believe this, there was a recent CQI with the hardware where it is now coated. I think that should help reduce the rust even more. A knife being rust proof really doesn't mean all that much to me. I know it might mean a lot to some people, but I'm not really doing anything that would need a knife to be rust proof. So I guess I'll talk about that a little bit more. But for the anatomy, like I was saying, LC200 blade, titanium handle scales, satin finish. This is a frame lock. It's got a tip up right hand and left hand pocket clip. It is pretty lefty friendly. It would kind of be hard to, you can still roll it out with the thumb, but if you are left-handed and you can and you are fine with Spydie flicking it, it is pretty easy to do that. I would say this is kind of close to your full-size knife size for me. It's made in the Taichung, Taiwan factory and designed by Marcin Schleich. So let me do some size comparisons here, and this is a pretty average size knife. Here is the PM2. And the PM2 is a little bit bigger, but the SpydieChef packs in a lot more blade length than the PM2 does. And then let's do the Mannix. So these are very similar to the same size. And then last, I will do the large Sabenza 21. So overall, this is a pretty average size knife. I'd be perfectly fine with carrying a knife of this size for the rest of my life. And also, it's pretty lightweight. Let me get a weight measurement. I believe it's around, I think it's under 4 ounces, but let's see. We're looking at about almost 3.8 ounces on here. So that's really good. I like to see that. Good size on here and good weight, not overly heavy. And I'd be fine to carry this in the summer. And it's getting hotter now. I'm not really wearing jeans every single day. And this knife, it really hasn't bothered me to carry it in lighter weight shorts. So for the design on this, Marcin Schleich has obviously, he's obviously made his name as a good designer, but it's not my favorite design in the world. I'll get into it a little bit more, but what I don't like about it is, one, it is made and kind of designed for the saber grip. As you can see, this handle here, it's got almost 2 different angles to it. It's got this one right here, and then that goes into this right here. And this little apex, I guess you could call it, is knocked down. There really isn't any issues with it being sharp. But what this does is it makes your hand kind of conform to this part right here, which kind of makes it in the saber grip. There is really no way to make it conform to the front one right here unless you hold it like that, which isn't very comfortable at all. But what it does is it makes you want to put your hand right here, and this is actually very comfortable. Now, my issue with that is the saber grip is not really my favorite grip. I feel like if you pick up a knife, you usually hold it like this, but that's not how I use it a lot of times in use. This cut is much less effective than a hammer grip, because a hammer grip, you're getting your hand very close to the blade. Now with this one and the hammer grip, this point right here is digging right into the middle of your hand. I'll talk about that more in ergonomics, but what I like about knives that are good with a hammer grip, that just kind of have a straight spine like this, is you can get your hand all the way up here and you're really close to that blade, so you can get a lot of power behind the cut. With the saber grip, as you can see, the main, I guess, force of my hand, at the middle of my hand is right here, and the blade is right here. And so I'm very far from it. I'm not getting as much strength on it. And a lot of times if I'm doing a cut with the saber grip, I can usually do it with a pinch grip like this, which is usually what I will result to. And when I do a harder cut, I will do the hammer grip, or a hammer grip, I guess that's right. Also the blade shape, it is designed for kitchen knife kind of use, but it's not my favorite. I'll talk about that a little bit more after I talk about the looks of this knife. So the looks, I'm actually a big fan of this. I really like how they finish this titanium. I don't really think there are many ways that I dislike the finishing on titanium, but this looks really good. I believe it's a bead blast that then they did a stone wash to, and I like it because it should hide wear better than just a straight bead blast. As you can see on my small Sabenza here, these get snail trails, which I think look good over time, but some people don't like them as much. And the stone wash here, I think also looks better and cleaner from the factory, and you don't really have as much fear of, messing it up. I also just like a straight stone wash finish on titanium, but I do really like this, and I think it looks good. How it's a little bit darker than the blade, I think it gives it a good contrast. Now for the screws, they are black, which I do think gives a little bit of contrast and does look pretty good. The satin finish on this, it's nice. One thing that I've noticed is this scratches up pretty easy. They're just hairline scratches, and this is my second take of this video, and I've always struggled to get them up on camera. But if I'm looking at it in natural light, it does show up easier, which I don't really mind that much. It just kind of is interesting how some steels scratch easier than others. For example, the Spy 27 scratch is pretty easy. Once again, I don't think these are going to show up, but steels, like M4, S35VN, I don't really feel like I've noticed as much of scratching as I have on these steels. Don't really know what it is, but keep in mind these scratches, the reason why I'm talking about them is because they're coming from cutting things like cardboard and just your regular EDC stuff. Obviously, if you cut something and you're going to run into some metal, you're probably going to scratch up your knife, and so it wouldn't really be that crazy to talk about, almost like it's a negative, but these are materials like cardboard, so I could have just cut a piece of cardboard that is kind of abrasive or maybe has some weird things in it. I don't know, but just kind of is interesting. Let me know if you've had the same experience with your LC200N. So now for more on the blade, let's talk, I'll touch on the blade shape now. So my issues with the blade shape is I don't feel like it's the best for EDC. It's not bad, and keep in mind that this is a nitpick. With blade shapes, there aren't many that are just like, man, I can't use that. Usually, if just a simple drop point, sheep's foot, even Warncliffe, I don't mind that much for EDC. But this is kind of what you'd almost... This would be good in the kitchen as a blade shape because what it does is it has this belly here and it has a pretty high tip. You wouldn't want a low tip like a Warncliffe or maybe a sheep's foot in the kitchen, because then you would primarily use that, and it might be good, but you could dig into your cutting board, or if you're maybe cutting a steak like on a ceramic plate or something, you could dig into that ceramic plate and pretty much just dull the crap out of your tip. So yeah, it's not my favorite blade shape in the world for EDC stuff, and like I said, this is kind of designed for the saber grip, and it almost works against the shape of this blade, because I notice a lot of times when I'm cutting like this, the material will just kind of slip out after it gets past right about this point. So not my favorite blade shape in the world. I can live with it, it's not bad, but I feel like I prefer a simple drop point or something like the Insingo that is similar to this. It just has a lower tip and less extreme of a belly over time. So yeah, that's just my thoughts about it. Also, the grind on this makes it, in my opinion, not adequate for kitchen knife use. Let me talk about this more after I show this, but we're looking 21 thousandths, about, it's around 20 thousandths throughout behind the edge. I've measured this a few times. And my thoughts about that is kitchen knives, most kitchen knives are under 10 thousandths behind the edge with a thin stock on them. This has a straight up everyday carry grind. This is pretty similar to what you would see on something like the PM2, except the PM2 just has a thicker stock at its thickest point. But when it gets thinner, it is similar to the SpydieChef. So this is definitely an EDC edge geometry, and I would argue that it should be thinner for everyday carry tasks. And so for this reason, this is not going to replace a kitchen knife at all. And there are other reasons too. One, the size of it, it's probably around a it's in between 3 and 3.5 inch blade, I would guess. And that is obviously not going to really be able to do the things that an 8-inch chef's knife could do. Now, maybe it could replace a paring knife, but I would argue that it's too thick behind the edge and has too thick of a stock to really replace a paring knife for, I guess, full-time kitchen use. Where I see this maybe coming in as a food prep tool is I would call it an EDC kitchen knife, if that makes any sense. Like if you're maybe on the go and you need to cut up your sandwich or something, or your kids want you to cut up an apple, sure, this will do this, but it's not going to prepare the turkey for Thanksgiving. I don't really think you're going to be bringing this on your hunting trips, processing game with it. I don't know. It's just, I think that when companies try and make a tool that does two jobs, it ends up doing those two jobs not as good as the sole knife. You know what I'm saying? Like a Leatherman. You think about it, a Leatherman is not going to like screw in a nail better than just a basic screwdriver. But the advantage of the Leatherman is all one thing in your pocket, and it is lighter weight. You can carry it with you. You're probably not going to be carrying a screwdriver or even like just a pair of pliers everywhere. Like you're not going to carry every single tool on the Leatherman with you everywhere you go. So that's where the Leatherman can come in. But this, it's trying to be an EDC knife. It's trying to be a kitchen knife, and it's because it's trying to be both, it is getting worse in both subjects. Kind of like this mini Adamas that I talked about. What was I saying? It's trying to be a small, compact, or a smaller EDC knife, but it's also with this stock thickness, with the blade grind, it's trying to be a hard use knife. And what it does is it makes it not as good at hard use because it has a smaller blade and not as much handle to work with. And it's also not as good at EDC because it's got a thicker blade and it's thicker in the pocket. So I feel like when companies try and do two things with one style of knife, they end up making those two things worse. So that's why I really like to see knives like the Gale Bradley 2. Knives that are full size, super thin behind the edge with really comfortable ergonomics. This is a straight up work knife. It's not trying to be some hard use pry bar. It's not trying to be a box cutter, but I mean, it just does a really great job. I really like knives like the Gale Bradley 2, and when they just serve one purpose and they do that purpose very well. And I think that that's what makes good knives great. You know, maybe if this is the one knife for the rest of your life and you find yourself cutting up a lot of food, sure, it would be good, but that's just my issues with it. I feel like this is trying to do two things at once and it is getting worse at both by trying to do that. Hopefully that makes sense. For the blade, LC200N as a steel, I like it. It's fine. First things first, I want to say from a complete user's perspective, I don't care. It works just fine. I have no issues with it. But from a knife enthusiast, I guess, knife sharpener, it didn't impress me as much as I thought it would. Honestly, I enjoy using Sharpening and Stropping S30V more than this. I understand that in an edge retention fight, these probably would be close. And obviously in a corrosion resistance battle, the LC200N would win. But this is way corrosion resistant. It's good enough for me. This is kind of my outdoors knife. And I think I cut like some wet grass or something and just let it sit on the blade for almost a week, and there was no rust at all after I cleaned it off. And it's just, that's good enough for me. I'm not a scuba diver. I'm not a full-time fisherman. I'm not doing that kind of stuff with my knives, so I don't think that rust really means all that much to me. And also sharpening, this thing didn't sharpen up as good as I thought it would. As you can see, this angle on here is pretty low. Spyderco's been sharpening their knives from the factory at a pretty low angle. I'm pretty sure they sharpen them at like 15 degrees per side with a 20-degree micro bevel, and a lot of times I'll just get rid of that micro bevel and sharpen it at 15 degrees per side. This one might actually be a little bit lower than that just based on the feel on the stone. But after going through that whole process, I noticed that it just wasn't as good of an edge as I would like. It wouldn't shave hair very well. And so I tried to, you know, sometimes if that happens, I'll just really focus on holding my angle and hone it back and forth. I tried that, still didn't work. So I ended up just micro beveling it probably around 17 to 20 degree in that area of a micro bevel. And it came up really good. So I don't know if that was an issue with my sharpening, or maybe LC200N just won't be able to hold that low of an angle. I'm not sure, but it is something to take note of. And also, I did notice some chipping earlier on, a couple of sharpenings ago. That could just be because the factory edge, maybe it was a burnt edge, but I always sharpen my Spyderco's. Pretty much any new knife I get, I will sharpen it out of the box, just because the factory edge, even though it may be sharp, probably won't give you the best performance. And now I'm not the person that needs absurd edge retention every day, just because I'm not doing that much crazy cutting with my knives, but still I would like to get the full performance out of my knives before I start to put them in my pocket. So I'm just going to blame that chipping that I saw on maybe the edge was still a little bit fatigued from the factory. I don't know, but LC200N, my thoughts on it, it's a fine steel. I like it, but the rust proof doesn't, like the rust resistance doesn't mean that much for me. And honestly, just S30V, I like it. It works. I have no issues with it. And I'm not saying that it's a better steel than LC200N, but I just like it more. It's one of those things that it's just my opinion. I know people are going to disagree, and I know that if you look at the steel's composition, if you look at edge retention results, you'll probably agree that LC200N is better comparing the two. But I just like S30V more. It's simpler. I'm used to it. I guess that's kind of my, could be an old person thought, you know, people who still carry a buck 110, they say it's better than all these other things when it's really not, but they just like it more, they're used to it. And so I guess that's kind of my thought comparing LC200N to S30V. I think I've said all I have to say about the blade. Oh, one thing I want to point out that I just want to give props to Spyderco for is this choil area. Good job, Spyderco. It's very similar to the Sabenza. They both do this kind of 45-degree cut in with that choil. But what Spyderco does that I like is they do a 90-degree plunge. What that means is it is the thinnest spot right here as it is all the way throughout the blade. And so if you sharpen this all the way to where there really is no choil right here, you're not going to get a smile or a thicker part of the edge. So you can just straight up sharpen this thing all the way up to the Spidey hole until you can't really use it anymore, which I really like that. And if you sharpen it up to there, you can always cut in your own choil, which I think is pretty cool. So overall, I like this choil. Good job, Spyderco. And I think that they really, what are the words for it? They did a great job with it. Sometimes with like this Mannix or something, they don't sharpen it all the way to the back there. And so I had to, you know, remove some metal and then really just dig into that plunge with like a diamond stone. And overall it worked out in the end, but I probably removed more metal than I would like. And sometimes they do such a bad job with that like on this military, I tried to do what I did with the Mannix, but it would have just taken too much time and I would have removed more steel than I should have, so I just straight up cut in a choil like that. So I'm glad that they did a good job with this, and I really appreciate it as a sharpener and just as someone who likes to see companies do good work with the choil on their knives. Now let's talk about fit and finish, and overall I'm very impressed. This is from the Taichung, Taiwan factory, and it is perfectly centered. It's got a smooth action, which I guess I'll talk about in a little bit. No blade play up and down, or side to side. And then the lockup, or I guess the only issue I've seen with the fit and finish is after a little bit of carry, I noticed the lanyard barrel started rattling. That's not that big of a complaint because, I mean, lanyard barrels on Sabenzas do that. So what I did is I actually took this knife apart, just put Loctite on the little ends of it that are in contact with this titanium, and I haven't had any rattles since then. I did a video showing that, but I was really sick, or not really sick, but I had bad allergies, so I sounded terrible during the whole video, so I didn't end up posting it. But lanyard barrels, this is just a question I have. What's the point of them? The only thing that I can really think of is maybe when you loop a lanyard through, if it was like paracord, maybe it would stick out a little bit if there wasn't a lanyard barrel there, and maybe the blade could cut it. I don't know, but I just don't really see the point of a lanyard barrel, because Sabenzas, every time I get a new Chris Reeve knife, I just take the lanyard barrel off, and I could just loop a lanyard through there if I wanted to. I just don't really get the point of them. I don't really think that they do much aesthetically, and I guess that's just my thoughts about it. I would like to know, maybe I'm just missing something and there's an obvious advantage to a lanyard barrel, but I'm really just not seeing it. I don't know. But the problem's fixed, and if it ever comes back again, if that Loctite wears off, I'll probably just take it out and put it in the box I got this knife in. I don't really know what I'm gonna do, but the lockup on this, it's pretty good. When I took this apart, I saw that it's a carbidized. Is it carbidized? I always mess this up. It's got to be a running joke on this channel now. how much I mess up carburized versus carbidized. But basically they heated up the lock face, kind of heat treated that titanium to make it stronger coming in contact with the blade, kind of like what they do with the Spyderco. I don't know if they're the same, but I prefer that over just regular titanium coming up against it, and I'd honestly prefer that over a lock bar insert coming up against the titanium there. As you can see, this lockup is pretty late, and it did kind of wear in after a couple days. It probably went from 50% to what it is now, which I'd say is closer to 60 to 70%, and I'm fine with that. A bunch of people that you'll see kind of in the Medford, Hinder, Strider crowd, they really want early lockup. Like, I'm talking 5% lockup on, like, when they sell knives, that's like a big bonus if it has early lockup. I guess it shows that the knife will really wear over time, but especially on these, you know, maybe not as reliable companies known for their really good lock face geometries, if they have that early of a lockup, they are very prone to failure. So I'm happy with a whole lot of lock bar covering that tang, just giving you more of a secure lockup. And as you can see with Spyderco's, all of these come with usually around 60% lockup, and they don't move over very fast at all. And I assume that it's going to just stay like this for a really long time and not run into any issues. So overall, I like the lock face geometry on this. A bunch of people might freak out that it's not early, but it's not. It usually isn't the case with knives that it's like, oh, after a year, maybe it moves every 10% until you get to 100%, and then you get lock rock, and then you're never going to be able to get that out. What it kind of does is it'll maybe move 10% the first couple months that you have it, and then stay like that for a really long time, and maybe move gradual over a long period of time. Like, I've never really seen a Spyderco 21 at full 100% lockup where it was no longer usable. So I guess that's just my thoughts, and I think that a lot of people think that lock bar travel is more of an issue than it actually is. Now let's talk about one issue that I could see with this lockup, and this is very nitpicky. I just want to say that really quick. But as you can see, this area that comes in contact with that stop pin is flat. So it is just a flat piece of steel coming in contact with that circular stop pin. If you look at a knife like the Spyderco, this little area is rounded here. It's not as easy to see because this is a bigger stop pin. It's got to have a larger larger radius to that curve, so it will come in contact with that stop pin. But what that's doing is that stop pin is distributing the force of it hitting that area throughout the entire circle. So if you looked at the stop pin, let's say my hand right here is the stop pin, this is the blade, it's coming in like that, and so the wear is extremely gradual, very little over time, and that's why you don't really see that much of a jump in the lockup. With this, keep in mind this is very nitpicky. It's a flat surface hitting this circular surface, so that could technically wear in this a little bit over time. It's not going to be as extreme as that, but it might wear in a little bit of a groove, causing that lockup to move over a little bit, just because the blade will be sitting up maybe a little bit higher. This is a very fraction of measurements, but causing that lock bar to have to move over a little bit more to still keep it secure. But what that does is technically that might become an issue. I haven't really seen it very much on knives that I have, and I assume that once it wears in a little groove, it will just kind of stay there and not move very much over time. It's not like it's going to gradually do it for a long time, but it definitely is something that could happen, and it just kind of makes sense. Sorry if I'm getting a little detailed. I really like to watch Randy Johnson. He's probably my favorite knife YouTuber, or one of them. And he doesn't post very much, but he has a bunch of detailed videos on lock engagement and stop pins. And so I've been watching those and really enjoying them. So I am kind of geeking out about this. So that's all I got for that. I need to hurry up with this review, but I'm having a good time, so might as well keep talking. For the ergonomics of this knife, the ergos, I wish that they were a little bit better. One minor improvement that I would like to see is that these are just kind of thinner handles. I really like an inlaid Spyderco just because it is very thick, and as you can see, it is much thicker than the SpydieChef here, and what that does, that just makes it more hand-filling, more comfortable. Knives, if you own something like the Benchmade Griptilian that has contouring and chamfering, you know that thing it just really is palm-filling, and that makes it very comfortable. This one, it just doesn't really feel like you're holding on to very much. A thin knife in your hand doesn't really create hot spots. It's just not as comfortable as a thicker knife. But what I like about this is that, what I don't really like is that, like I said before, it forces you into the saber grip. So as you can see, there are two different angles like that, and since that forces you into the saber grip, when you use the hammer grip, this area is poking into your hand. So I do an ergonomics test where I basically, I take 5 or 6 pieces of cardboard and just try and cut through all of them using pretty much all the strength I have in my body. And I'll be able to see if there are any hot spots. A lot of people just check the ergonomics by squeezing down really hard on the knife, and that usually will let you know if there's a hot spot with the pocket clip, but not with something along the spine of the handle right here. And so when I did that, I did notice that this little part dug in my hand and was kind of uncomfortable. You know, are you really going to need to cut 5 or 6 pieces of cardboard at once? No, but it definitely is a thing, and so I'd like to see this knife. I guess the changes that I would make that would just make it amazing for me, I would flatten this out and then make a more normal blade shape, and you wouldn't run into any issues. If you flatten this out, you might run into an issue with the blade sticking out a little bit, but if you just flatten this off, ground it thinner, and then just had more of a normal blade shape, I think that would make this knife great. And I am kind of nitpicking this thing to death, but I do like the SpydieChef. It's just there are some issues, I think mostly just with the design of it and the idea behind it. But that's about all I got for the ergos. There is no forward finger choil there, which I kind of like to see change up just because I'm not one of those guys that is always talking about blade to handle ratio. But sometimes on these bigger knives it's really the PM2. On these bigger knives that don't have much blade length, I like a knife with a lot of blade length and still the ability to get a 4-finger grip on the handle. Now for the carry of this, the carry is good, really have no complaints. Like I showed before, 3.8 ounces on this thing. It's got the regular deep carry wire pocket clip. You can carry it left-handed like I mentioned before. The wire clip's the best. I really like it. I mean, it's not the best, but it's a very great clip. I like it because it can slide in your pocket very easy. Sometimes this also depends on the shorts or pants that I'm wearing, but I'll have to hold the pocket and then put the knife in, or sometimes I'll have to hold the clip up and put the knife in. This one I can just put straight down on my pocket and it slides in there very nicely. Some people don't like the look of the wire clip. I understand that, but you can't argue with the functionability of it. Functionability, is that a word? No, you can't argue with the function of it and just how good it works. I am a big fan of the wire clip, and really my only issue is when with the wire clip is when it sits, it's on a smaller knife and it sits up and then the back of it is poking into your hand. All right, now let's talk about the action of this. So the action is very good. You know, it honestly kind of surprised me on the action of it. It's smooth, runs on phosphor bronze washers, really no issue with it. And yeah, it's better than I thought it would be. I don't really care about the action, but you can slow roll it easy. You can Spydie flick it even if you're right-handed. And the thumb flick isn't the best, but it still works. I have no issues with that. So now for the value of this, to kind of wrap things up, $240. I would like this to be made in America, but I do think that the Taichung does better work with the fit and finish than Golden does, but I still like to buy more American-made products. This knife is not really going to compete with knives like the Sebenza, with knives like Hinder's. Even though I haven't tried them, I can pretty much already tell that it won't be able to compete with them. But I still think it's a quality knife. It's a good build. And those changes that I mentioned were the changes that I put to just really make this knife over the top. I just feel like that the main issue with this knife is it's trying to be a kitchen knife. It's trying to be an EDC knife. And because it's trying to do that, it gets better in both categories. So I hope that makes sense. But that's really all I got for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Sorry that this one went a little long, but I just had a lot to say. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you are new, and I'll see you guys in the next one.